Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Keeping Your Small Business Cyber Safe, presented by eSentire and FoxNet. My name is Allison Mitchell, and I am part of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce team. Before we start our webinar today, there are a few housekeeping items I would like to share. Your microphone should be muted, but please double check that so we can reduce background noise. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar by typing them into the question box in your control panel. Our presenters will be answering your questions at the end of their presentation. After the webinar, all webinar registrants will be receiving a follow-up email that has a copy of the webinar link in it. Our presenters today are Eldon Sprickerhoff, who is founder and Chief Innovation Officer of eSentire, and Bill Fox, founder and CEO of FoxNet. Eldon is the original pioneer and inventor of what is now referred to as Managed Detection and Response, MDR. In founding eSentire, he responded to the incipient yet rapidly growing demand for a more proactive approach to preventing and investigating information security breaches. Now, with over 20 years of tactical experience, Eldon is acknowledged as a subject matter expert in information security analysis. Bill Fox is the head Fox at FoxNet. He specializes in information technology and business management. Dedicated to his FoxNet team and to his clients, his focus on finding creative IT solutions has helped FoxNet become one of Canada's top 100 IT solution providers. FoxNet has provided IT solutions for small to large enterprises over the past 18 years and continues to adapt to changes in the rapidly evolving world of technology. On the webinar today, we'll also be joined by the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce President and CEO Ian McLean, who will be moderating questions at the end of Eldon and Bill's presentation. I would now like to invite Bill to begin his presentation.
Hello, everybody. It's Bill Fox from FoxNet. As Allison just kindly introduced me, we are a local company here for the last 18 years, based in Waterloo. We are a managed service provider from small to large businesses. It's desktop, networking, server, backup, disaster recovery, and of course security, of which we have recently partnered with eSentire to provide for. We have a lot of partnerships of corporate hardware and software providers, HP, Cisco, VMware, Veeam, Sophos, and many others. And as Allison said, we've been named one of the top 100 service providers by CDN, as well as recently recognized as one of the top 5 managed service practice companies in Canada by Cloud Tango. So over to you there, Eldon.
Okay. Thank you. So founder and Chief Innovation Officer at eSentire. We've been in business again since the end of 2001. Head office is in Waterloo. We moved to Waterloo from Cambridge just in the middle of last year. We're across 48 countries worldwide. We have operation centers looking at bad behavior, inappropriate traffic, and defending clients large and small. Next slide, please. And so we've working with FoxNet specifically. We're building up an offering that gives our enterprise strength technology and portfolio offerings that are really good to properly tailored to this audience. Some of the things are a network sensor and sort of a house account aggregation and different sort of essential packages that help us tightly work with FoxNet to help address their clients' security concerns.
One of the things that we're able to do with Eldon and eSentire is we're bringing to the smaller business sector and enterprise security levels that we're not previously able to do in terms of the costs associated with it. So we're really excited to have that as part of our portfolio.
Excellent. So to get started, we're, pretty much every company that is able to have employees work from home is in that kind of mode right now. I've been calling this COVID a forcing function, where you're suddenly you may have been thinking about doing better integration with respect to moving into technology, over whether it's moving things more to the cloud. But what's happened now, you'd be able to do this over a year and a half or a couple of years. You're pretty much everyone is forced to do this now, and so most firms were unprepared for that kind of rapid movement. And with everyone working from home now, you may not have thought about what an attack would look like. And as I said, it's been a few weeks. This is probably a good time to now that you're sort of settled in to this new environment. I think it's a good idea to take a step back and review your security stance and ensure that you're properly defending yourselves, and think about what it's going to look like on the other end of this when we reintegrate back into the new norm. Next slide, please. So the first thing I want to emphasize here is that criminals don't care that they're looking for a payout, and they don't necessarily care that you're running in sort of a degraded mode, like in a business continuity mode or a DR mode, disaster recovery mode. They're just looking to gain access. They're going to turn information into money, and so they're more than happy to kick you while you're down. And next slide, please. And there's evidence of this. If you go through some of the different media sites, you can there's cases where U.S. officials have been accusing Russia of spreading disinformation about COVID as part of different sort of coordinated campaigns. And this is something that has been referred to as another extension of some of the things that happened in the election in 2016. You're seeing attacks whereas the nearly identical message is being translated into multiple languages, English, German, French, some blaming the US for the outbreak, whether it's questions to wage economic war and so on. Next slide, please. And there's examples of there's always phishing emails where people are trying to gain information, credentials to gain access to email or had ransomware and so on. We've seen that whereas it could, some of the attack methods or the hook, the lure that brings people in have been insurance policies or so on. There's a lot of pivoting now to be around COVID-19 awareness and things like this. So this has been a big aspect of how it's changed. So there's still the phishing emails and attacks, but they're playing on people's fear to try to get people to click on registers and on links to register and move forward. Next slide, please. And this is a threat post. It's another information security group. There's two specific campaigns that they've discovered that are using PDFs and Word documents. And when you open these, you end up with getting a piece of software called a RAT, remote access tool, enabled on your machine, and it allows clipboard copying and keystroke logging and remote, continued remote access to harvest credentials and then give attackers a toehold into your environment. Next slide, please. And there was a section on Tech Radar where people were, especially at the early, when they're looking for information about the spread of the virus, they were looking for maps such as this. And there is a legitimate one from Johns Hopkins, but they've been copying the data out of that and putting this on top of it. So building sort of fraudulent outbreak maps, but putting malware through it as well. So basically trying to infect people who are just looking for information and dissipate some fear or concern. Next slide, please. And there's one example that's fairly recent that mentioned that there's a Czech hospital that was shuttered after a coronavirus themed attack. And this is this is particularly annoying and angering to me because there's enough problems going on right now that the front line they have enough issues. If you're a particularly evil attacker, going after a hospital that's already dealing with so many cases of coronavirus and trying to get them to pay to get the data unlocked, that's particularly evil. There's a different attack method that is sneaky, not quite necessarily evil, but pretty sneaky as it plays on people's fears that we've seen the last week. And it's an email that comes in ostensibly from your HR department, and it's asking for a Zoom meeting just with you. And so that has a tendency to get people a little freaked out. Because you go to the worst idea, whether it's layoffs or furloughs, and this kind of fear, it goes to the core of people's emotions and increases the click volume. And so this kind of thing preys on people. And this is something that makes it easier for people to be encouraged to click forward, and that they gain access and ransomware or whatever it was to eventually push forward. Next slide, please. So I think one of the biggest things here is we're all in a very unusual position, and we're not sure of things that are where we're going to be in the end of this. I'd say it's really important to be able to distinguish myth from fact. We're trying to reduce unwarranted fear and recognize that attackers can use this against you. So I say as a management team, it's really important that you can deal with misinformation. And there's, the next slide will have pieces where, the messaging that you send beyond, purely just a cybersecurity perspective is really important to help people recognize that as leaders, we're figuring out ways to move forward. And one of the things is, maintain it. You can minimize the effects of misinformation. Next slide, please. And I said that one of these big things is the repeated regular updates to situation. I know at eSentire we have weekly all hands meetings, and there's a slide on COVID, and what that looks like. We operate in many different jurisdictions. We have offices in different time zones and countries, and so we're trying to be consistent as to what the updates look like, what we are doing, what this might look like when we open up again, and try to get avoid hyperbole, and just keep people informed as to the strategies that we're going to use going forward. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, I think the one thing to think about here is, while this is, this is the, I say, tongue firmly planted in cheek that this is my first pandemic. This is not especially new. There are, world events that happen that criminals that often look to exploit, unsuspecting people, whether through chaos and fear. Other one that we've been through as eSentire was natural disaster. And next slide, please. Talking specifically in this case about Hurricane Sandy. So this was in 2012 during the hurricane season. It killed 200 some people. It hit 24 U.S. states. A lot of things going on the eastern seaboard, which has even now it has a huge population of the infected COVID, whether it's in New York City, all the way down the coast into Florida. And so incredible amount of damage that was brought to this. And while this wasn't directly a cyber attack, one of the things that came out of this was some of the findings that as we were doing analysis of the traffic and the behavior of attackers while this was going on. Next slide, please. So, there are similarities within what we have right now with COVID and the parts of Hurricane Sandy. And I think one of them was, to do with, we did an analysis of attacks, and we saw, data that had like a 30 to 40% drop in network traffic across our client base during the 2 weeks during and after the hurricane. We saw the threats remained the same. The level of threats were the same, so the type of attacks were the same, but the number of attacks went up. And the way that we justify or try to explain this is that say criminals understand the disaster and chaos. People working from home because they can't get to work, whether it was subway lines like we had in the last slide, power outages, people move into DR mode. And so this is analogous to what we're having right now. And people looking for, the tech staff are looking for ways to go into disaster recovery mode. They were bringing up systems that were not necessarily patched properly, and this is where the vector of attack gets more prevalent. Could you go to the next page, please? So it was interesting because after this came out, there was the second version of this book. The American Bar Association had put together done a new release of this book, and this for any kind of professional that's not necessarily techie focused, this is a pretty good handbook for what the business professional needs to do. And it is focused on law, lawyers, but it still is a very good, well-written handbook for to get a sense as to what kind of problems you have with cybersecurity and defense of information. So next slide, please. So what it came out of this is it became the bar by which business continuity and disaster recovery plans were sort of measured from then on. And they came out and said, if a client's DR plans cannot pass the Hurricane Sandy test, you should expect that other cyber incidents will cause prolonged disruption. So this became sort of that test case for that. Next slide. I think it's off to Bill then.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Eldon. I guess everybody realizes that the social distancing is happening. We're all working from home now. There's a bunch of practices that firms should be doing for their employees, and there's a bunch of things the employees should do. So just walk through some of those points right now. Next slide, please. So there's a number of points here we'll talk to. First off, if companies should have a business continuity plan, and a business continuity plan is basically planning for some kind of a disaster, having some kind of a disaster response, and some plan to be able to return to some kind of normal sort of status once this is all over. And at this point in time, this is where we're at. Next point, please. Keep your employees informed. Regular cadence is very important at this moment in time. If your offices are like ours, you're not seeing each other, so weekly, daily, even communications are very important. Next point. Very important to use VPNs before signing on to especially public Wi-Fi networks. This will encrypt the internet traffic. This is one of the key ways that the hackers can get into your network and infect your network at your office as well. Next point. So enforce a multi-factor authentication. So, we all use user and password as authentication. In some cases, you may want to have like a secret question, like the Holy Grail thing, what's your favorite color, something like that. There's also biometrics verification, such as like retina or voice or fingerprint recognition, but that's taking it to another level, of course. Next point. It's very important to disable the administrative privileges. By saying that, Local administrative privileges will just open the network to more risk. So the endpoints are the greatest entry for hackers to get into your network. So you do not want you don't want the users to have administrative privileges. Next one. Protecting your endpoints is very important. You need to have up-to-date firewalls, antivirus software, anti-malware software on any device that you're using. Next one. So managing, bring your own devices. There are mobile device management platforms that you can use. Obviously, some people are using their own devices, and that goes back to some of the other points that I talked about in terms of using encryption and that kind of thing. Next point. Up-to-date patches, that's pretty self-explanatory. Next point. So you want to help employees secure their home office. If they use encryption software, so if a device is lost or stolen, the data can't be accessed. So that's a very important point to use encryption stamp software. Next slide. So bringing your own device. Companies should create a cybersecurity policy and get sign off to that if you have new employees or if you have a cybersecurity policy, so that everybody realizes what the importance of that is. Next slide. Keeping informed of company updates. This pretty much is their software updates that need to be performed, that kind of thing, to make sure that you're protected. Next one. Password protect conference calls. Also, I think most people use passwords for this, but also there's a lot of Zoom bombing going on. So there's a number of ways you can avoid that by, again, using passwords, controlling the access, controlling, once the meeting begins, you can cut off people from joining in after the fact. Next point. So your company most likely has a set of IT services such as Office 365, some kind of corporate messenger like Slack or maybe HipChat. And then, of course, you probably have corporate email. Those tools are configured by your IT service providers or your professionals in your company. And it's their responsibility for setting it up correctly. So the main thing here is just to stick to those corporate resources. Next one. We already did that one, so next one. Local backups are very important. That's where a lot of ransomware comes into place if the backups aren't done properly. Next point. To securely dispense of your sensitive data, that's a very important one. They've done a recent study, showed that about 60% of computers on the secondhand market were still had sensitive data on them. So disposing of those computers is something that gets overlooked in a lot of cases. Next point. Strong password. That's the next slide. There's a whole bunch of stuff on passwords, so we'll do that one next. And then we already talked about number 9. So let's go to the next slide, which is there's a number of ways to come up with strong passwords. There are certain passwords. Actually, the most commonly used passwords. I googled this. 5 most commonly used passwords. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1. QWERTY 2. 11111111. Password itself and password 1. So if you're using any of those, reminds me, I better get a couple of those off mine. Don't use those, in other words. Anyways, so when it comes to passwords, there's a bunch of, you can go to the next point. There's a bunch of, actually just bring out the whole slide if you don't mind, Allison. There's a bunch of things to to remember. I think years ago, common security practices was to change your password regularly. But the problem with that is twofold. If you're like me, they're hard to remember. So that's one thing. But the other thing too is you want to make them so that they're unique, so they're hard to guess. So making passwords unique and strong, you need at least say 12 characters. You need diversity of characters. Try to think of phrases perhaps, like songs or words that you misspell. There's a number of different ways to do it. But the key is it's not the frequency, it's the uniqueness and the length of the characters are really the key thing, and the two-factor authentication is extremely important. So we go to the next slide. So I've been pawned. So if you've been pawned, there actually is a legit website that allows you to check whether or not your data has been compromised. So you just go to this website here and put in your email, and I believe they also have a notification service too that will let you know if you have been pawned. So that may be something you've never heard of before, but because I know I do. So next slide. So you can just fill in all the points here. Here's what the employees require the IT support people to do. So some of these things, I mean, the IT people that are listening will understand. The SID, for example, is the server set identifier. That's the name that's assigned to your network. So you want to change that. So in my case, if let's say I had Bill Fox's network, it would be easy for them to find out who I am. So you want to change the name of that. When it comes to router, it comes with a default passphrase known as the WPA2 or WPA2. It's a security key. We want to change that as well. The passwords we've already talked about. A lot of this is just common sense. Guest Wi-Fi's, for example, in your office, you probably have guest Wi-Fi and you have your own Wi-Fi. There's just a lot of sort of common sense things that your IT company will have to do for you. These are the things that they would have to do for you. So I won't get into too much detail on that. And I think it's back to you there, Eldon.
Sure, next slide, please. So the one thing that I want to, you can bring up all the full 4 points, please. The one thing I really want to emphasize is that, it's very easy for people to look at cybersecurity as a pure IT technical piece. And I maintain that you really need to look at it from a business risk perspective, and you need to make sure that you have a good sense of what attacks are going on there and be able to upskill as appropriate to deal with the importance of data and the access of your employees. And there are gaps that exist, way beyond the IT security team. People coming and leaving all the time. It's important that you get a sense as to, what can each person do to help keep their data and themselves and the company secure. And I'd say, it's easy to lay the blame on people themselves, but first of all, that's not terribly helpful. And there's also a disconnect between people problems and using tech resources to solve these people problems. That kind of matchup does not usually fit. There's always a gap that comes out of that. And so I maintain that it's important that you show each employee that it is important that they are part of that cybersecurity solution throughout the business. That they are, people are the weakest link. It's going back on something that was said earlier about patching. You can build up a process to patch systems, but it gets more difficult when you go remote. It's very difficult to patch people. And we bring our own bias and our fears, and attackers will use that against us. The other thing I want to emphasize here is that it's unlikely that given the situation it'll be resolved to the point where we were a few months ago, and that now that we're remote, we're taking there's a lot of firms that are taking sort of a cheap and easy approach to remote connectivity and using cheap free antivirus, but this kind of thing is subject to blowback, because when we do get outside of to the other side of this, we're going to bring that kind of loose process back to it. And so again, I want you to start thinking about what it looks like to come out of this, and because we're not sure when we will come out of it as well, that you take a look at every business process that required some kind of tooling that required physical proximity will need to be reviewed and updated. And so that's things like authentication and onboarding, offboarding, and sort of instant response planning. I think that's about it for this bullet point. I think we can go right into Q&A mode.
Yes.
Well, is my camera going to go on here? I gotta. Let me just see here. No one can see you. There we go. Anyways, I think I should come on. There we go. Listen, Eldon and Bill, want to thank you for joining us today. And there'll be some questions that I'm sure will come up here as people kind of get started. But let me start a little bit. Part of the reason that we were going to do this as a point of view luncheon is, and I ran into you, Bill, I think it was at a Communitech event, and for some reason there have been some hacks with not-for-profits, and I said I'm really scared for the chamber. We have all kinds of either financial and personal information or business information. Maybe, and it happened to run into you that day, and I said, geez, we really need to make sure that small and medium-sized business really focus on this, because it's a huge issue for them that puts their business at risk, and then the liabilities, etc. Maybe just talk briefly, but when both of you can take a run. How did you guys develop this relationship? Because one of the things that I know is that eSentire is a global leader, one of the best in the world. A lot of your clients, Eldon, are all over the world, but because it's big, it generally would be probably larger businesses, and I think the marrying together of taking that technology and making it available for small and medium-sized businesses is what is kind of interesting to me and important for businesses, not just here in the region, but across the country. But 95% of businesses would qualify as being in that small business category. So maybe I'll start with you, Bill, and then Eldon, you can come in.
Well, we were engaged in conversations with eSentire probably about 2 years ago, and we looked at the product to add to our portfolio because we liked the enterprise level of security that it provides. Unfortunately, at that time, the pricing model did not work for our managed service practice. So we, put things on hold for a while, and eventually they came around to the point that they wanted to develop a managed service model that they could roll out through companies like ourselves to this mid-market, small marketplace, and be able to provide that service. So we wanted to partner with them all along. It just wasn't feasible at the time of the kind of customer base that we had at that time. So it worked out well for us.
And I know we've met with Bill and his team again many over the last many months. There's what we liked is we don't do the integration piece. We focused on security from the very beginning, and so it was a perfect match. There's a lot of things that are similar with the soft skill side of it, the high touch, great team. We improved our partner side in the last 2 years as well. We know that FoxNet has some very happy clients, and there's a lot of things that the high level of customer service is right in the core of our offering. And so it's, from a partnership perspective, it's perfect.
I'll tell you, just seeing your operation, it's like you're going into like the Starship Enterprise when you go to eSentire. You've got screens, and it really is. It's kind of really wild where you're looking at hacks right across the world. And so, in a global leader right here in the region of Waterloo. Listen, I'm going to go to the board here. The question is: are hackers more likely to target particular businesses and large institutions, or do they cast a wide net? Meaning big and small, because I think that's what everyone wants to know. Are they going after big guys, small guys, or is it everybody?
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead, Eldon.
So the way I look at it, so I'm going to change the perspective a little bit. So, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, the attackers themselves it's become more of a sort of a criminal enterprise. And so if I go back sort of 15 years, 10 to 15 years, if you want to, try to infect people or try to get people's credentials or so on, you had to write your own malware. And so you had to understand operating systems. You had to generally, understand Windows, be able to write code, and you'd have to figure out how you would find people to send the malicious payload to, and how do you get paid for these things. And it's changed quite a bit now, especially with, there was a big hit of ransomware that really became popular about 5 or so years ago. But the people who were originally writing ransomware, after that, it was sort of, $500 worth of Bitcoin to unlock one machine. They figured out that they took a sort of entrepreneurial perspective and said, if we offer this as a service, we can do more outreach. So you don't have to right now, if you want to have one of these campaigns, you can just go online, and for sort of the equivalent of, €50 a month, they will give you ransomware as a service. And they will give you a list of email addresses. They will create your own ransomware. They will test it across antivirus vendors to see that, if they'll get hit. They will give you lists of people to mail it out to. It all depends on how, sort of a takeout menu. They'll let you, you can select as many of the options as you want. They will, help if they'll mail out the malware. They will, people if you want to get paid, they will help people set up Bitcoin accounts. They will, walk through that whole process. And for them, the cost of sending out an email is a fraction of a cent. And so, whether it's, if I took the original pricing, which was, say $500 US per, infected machine, the profit margin is astronomical, right? So, even if they send out, 100,000 emails, whether it's big, whether it's small, they don't care. They get one. If they get,
they're driving it's a volume business. So whether you're big or small, it's a volume business.
Now the other thing now is, again, 3 to 5 years ago, it was looking at one machine and then getting $500 US. The attack now is more, it's not so sudden. So what they'll do is they will try to, get credentials. They'll install malware. Instead of starting to encrypt immediately, they will try to spread this kind of malicious code across every machine in the environment very quietly. And then on say a Friday night or Saturday morning, they'll start encrypting everything. So, instead of having one machine in 50 or 1,000 that's infected, they will infect every single machine starting, Friday night. So they, if you're not noticing it, then you might notice, and until Monday morning when people start logging in and they have trouble logging in, that you realize you've been hit. And the other side of this is that by this time, the malicious code has made its way into the backup cycle. So, they may wait weeks until they decide to do the strike. And so when you try to do a restore, you're restoring the old malicious code back on top of it. So, and this is where they're going into $1 million ransoms. And there are firms that are paying this. There are municipalities that have been paying this kind of thing as well, where they get so embedded into the organization, you don't have much of a choice other than, try to, and I never recommend paying the ransom, but there are situations where that's the only choice they have. I think that's a good place where we look at the security perspective. Bill has the aspects of the integration side as well, and that's where they dovetail together. So this is where I'm going to
maybe pick
pass the
up there,
baton.
Bill. Perfect. No, but I think that's a good handoff point, because this is, you talked about in your presentation, there's a lot of points along the way, but most of our members, like 75, 80% would be the really small business, the core of small business. And it, not being able to do business for 2 or 3 days while you're sorting this out is a real problem. So, I mean, it leads to, so Bill, how do you, for the smaller business, and that's on the integration side with SMEs, how do you take it from that point that Eldon's talking about around the security side and to the implementation or the execution part?
So the way we support our end users is through automation tools and remote management type technology. So this would be the same for the securities. It is for the desktops. It is for the networking servers, etc. So it's the same principle. We would get the notifications. We work with the Security Operations Center with eSentire. They would alert us, and then we would take it from there.
Okay, I'm having a trouble here finding this. So I'm going to ask you while I figure out how to get to the next question. So you talked about and maybe both of you can take a crack at this, the business continuity plan, right? And when I look at that, and I was a small business owner myself, and small business, kind of go, that sounds really complicated. And do I really have the ability to do that? Maybe unpack what that means, and things like that can really go a long way, like multi-factor ID, the passwords, having more complicated passwords, that can go a long way. But talk about that business continuity plan, because what I found interesting for both of you in the presentation is this is a point in time. We're all working at home, and we're going to try and hopefully get through this without any crisis. But I think a lot of this will continue. We're going to see more online. We're going to see more people working from home, or at least partially, which means we got to start preparing for how do you actually do business, and how do you do your business continuity plan when something goes wrong. So maybe start with Bill, and then Eldon, and you can come in after that, and I'll figure out how to get to the next question on the screen here.
Okay, all right. Well, a lot of companies won't have a business continuity plan. That's for starters, right? And that's something that maybe people will either readdress what they have or build one out. And then again, it comes down to 3 phases. Trying to plan for some kind of disaster such as this. Could be something totally different, like a flood or a fire. Try to figure out how to get to the disaster mode and how to resolve it, and then you're at the last phase of getting back to the normal course of business. So it basically comes down to you're going to have key applications and key operations that need to keep going. Some things perhaps do not have to be going when you're in a state like this, but there are certain things like sales, service, or whatever it is that's the lifeline to your business. Make the continuity plan around those key things. So things such as perhaps marketing is not a thing that would be part of your business continuity plan. It's just the essentials. And with that, of course, those essentials need to be secured, and that's where the eSentire piece would come into it.
Okay. I think one of the big things is it needs to be appropriate to your size and the business that you have. I said, try to get rid of single points of failure. That's really the biggest thing. So, if you exist on, a single laptop that you move around, and that's not unusual, you better make sure that you have excellent backup capabilities. You should test those backups on a regular basis as well, because, we've seen cases where people have a backup, they think that the backup is running, but they've never tested the restore feature. And then when they need it, they discover that nothing has been backed up for the last 8 months. And, that, unnecessarily complicates these things. I think, the other piece is it's easy to go, if we were talking about just an endpoint piece, it's easy to go with sort of free antivirus as an example. They're simply not that effective. There are some that are better than, some there are certain antivirus vendors that are better than others. It's, you know, if you get a consumer level product and you're trying to use it for work pieces, you may find that there's a disconnect, and that puts you in a very poor, disadvantageous situation.
Okay, there's a couple of comments here. I assume the presentation that we did, we'll send out, and Allison can pipe in here when we close up. I assume that presentation we can send out to the attendees, because I think that's a good starting point of figuring out. And maybe I missed that at the beginning. So, but there was a question around that. So one of the next question is, you know, and I've got these before, both at the chamber, my personal email, saying you've been hacked. If you don't send such and such, I'm going to send, you know, whatever, your banking information or your e-list or pictures or whatever. They make all, and you kind of go, well, most of the time I know it's not true because I'm not that excited and I don't have any money. But regardless, the question here is, you get an email and you say, you know, you've been hacked. You know, what should you do? Ignoring it's probably not the right idea, but making sure, like, how do you take and make sure you've got the backup service to in case it is happening, and who do you talk to? I mean, I assume that you call your IT person and say, is this real or not? Because you get a lot of I would have false phishing expeditions where people don't really have control of your computer, don't have your information, but they're hoping you might give them $50 or $100 or $500, right? So maybe I'll start with you, Bill, and then Eldon, because I think they change so rapidly. What are you looking for, and how do you know what's real and what's not?
So I think the key thing, which we kind of touched on earlier, was if the data or what it is that they're trying to steal has been backed up and you can restore it properly, there's not much they can do. They can't really shut you down. So there's not much they can do to hurt you from that perspective. One of the key things you have to do is you got to go in and change all your passwords. Make sure that because they'll try to re-enter again. So the main thing is you want to be able to shut that down as soon as possible. You're correct in saying a lot of it is just, you know, they're just phishing really for you. I don't know about the pictures part. I mean, I can't comment on that one, but nobody wants any pictures of me, so I don't even care if they got them. So, but the most of it is just, you know, scare tactics. And if your data is restored and it's not overly sensitive, I think you're fine. I mean, we've seen some of the major hacks of the banks and that kind of thing where they really have taken some really key data. But I think for the average smaller business like ourselves, I don't think it's as big a risk, but it is still scary nonetheless.
You know, and it really is, you know, these kind of attacks, I call them the bottom feeders, because what they've done, you know, there are dumps of credentials that are out there. So I think, you know, one that went back quite a ways was LinkedIn. So, you know, everybody's email address and password is available in this password dump. And so what they've done is gone through and said, you know, put out an email that says, you know, here's in the subject field, you know, here's the password. You know, we know it's you. We have pictures of you, you know, video of salacious nature. You know, we're going to release them unless you send, you know, how much ever, you know, a few $100s in Bitcoin to this address. And I don't think I've ever seen a single instance where that was actually legitimate. It's just, you know, trying to scare people. It's the equivalent of, you know, someone calling up and saying that they're from Microsoft and that your machine has a virus on it. They, you know, it's bottom feeding scare tactics, and it's creepy sounding, but I don't think I've ever heard of that actually being legitimate. You know, I've seen cases where, you know, there's ransomware and you can tell that they're, you know, you've been hit hard because things are locked up and there's a big, you know, thing on the screen. Somewhere in between those two that we see a lot for small medium business are business email compromise. So, you know, someone pretends to be, you know, I pretend to get an email from Bill Fox, but it's, you know, it's not Bill Fox at FoxNet. It's Bill, you know, Bill Fox 2589@gmail.com, but it looks like it's Bill, and he's asking, you know, for something that, you know, he needs some help. He's, you know, sort of the equivalent of being, stuck in a foreign country, or you get something that looks like it's from your CEO, and they want to buy Apple gift cards to, thank people who
I had
just
one of
come
those
up with
yesterday. I had one of those yesterday, actually.
Yeah, so that's right in
You
between
never
those
send
two.
those cards today either, Eldon. I don't know why. I'm still waiting for that, by the way. Those are real. Those are me.
Definitely. We see that a lot, and that's, a small, medium business, we see that, and that's that's an actual, legitimate attack that, they don't have credentials, they just have your email, and they have, they've gone through LinkedIn, for example, to see who might be your boss, what would your CEO look like, and that still gets a lot of hits today, and it's not, it's whether whether or not you host your own mail server or you're using O365 or whatever, we see just a lot of attempted business email compromise across small and medium business. And people, the first thing you need to think about is there's no malware that goes along with this email, so it doesn't get flagged necessarily as malicious code. And so there's things that Microsoft and some other providers are doing to help sort of mitigate these things. But still, this is on my third bullet point at the end. It says it's easy to blame people. That rarely solves the real problem. There are technical fixes that help to do that, but it's not a technical problem, it's a people problem. And there's always a disconnect when you've got a people problem and you're trying to use a tech solution to match that. So, I repeatedly call it an inoculation of skepticism, where you have to get people not to believe what they read on email.
Okay, last few minutes, and I would say, when I ran into Bill, I guess it was, I don't know, last fall, and I was, I always think about it, but in that hack was, we got, our own clients or members, if you will, and there's information about that. So, and I'm responsible for that information, just like any of the businesses listening in today, whether they're big or small, are responsible for the data that they have. So I think the way I and why I think this is important, once we can meet in person, we'll do this again with folks and maybe walk through some more specific examples. This is almost like core infrastructure for your business, because if your data gets compromised, most businesses, that's a chunk of what you're doing. So I'm going to ask one more question, and I think you've answered this, but maybe in your last wrap-up comments, because I think you can probably weave this in. Are there particular businesses that they target? You talked about big or small. It's, it depends on whether they're doing volume or not. Are there particular businesses that need to pay attention, or is this just something that everyone needs to pay attention? So maybe we'll start with Eldon and Bill, and you can do some wrap up as you answer this question.
So, I think I'd say that there's an economics curve, right? So there's a ability to pay on the curve, and then there's most likely to not be well defended. So somewhere between those two is our sort of sweet spots. So who has interesting data and is less likely to be defended. And so this is why I think you've seen a lot in again, things like communities, so municipalities, for example, that have been hit hard in the last year, where they have a lot of data and not necessarily sure of how to defend that as well. And again, it's there's different attackers that want different things. Some want bank accounts. And so, rather than going after the bank itself that has put in generally pretty good defense mechanisms with anomaly detection and so on, that they'll go after somebody that might be a sort of a watering hole. So if I were going to go after you, I would try to go after the website, right? The chamber website. They said, there's a lot of people that would aggregate at this single place. If I can infect a percentage of them, that's a way I can jump off from there as well. So so much of it has to do with how can I get the best bang for the buck to do the least amount of effort, but get the most number of successful attacks. Billy? If I were an attacker.
Yeah, I mean, that pretty much covers it. I mean, companies that have a lot of intellectual property as well would probably be pretty susceptible to target attacks. I mean, the kind of ones that our size of company would get, and maybe a lot of the listeners today would get, are the, who's ever paying the bills would get an email from me saying, hey, can you wire $50,000 to Hong Kong, or can you make sure this amount goes somewhere? And I mean, a lot of it has to do with, as Eldon said, they're just fishing around. But if the users are kind of educated in terms of what the latest scams are, which the one thing that eSentire does provide is, because they're using AI, they have all that intelligence of what sort of the ongoing things that you need to be aware of. As long as you can educate the end users on that, then it'd be less likely to click on that or act on one of those kind of requests, like there goes $50,000 to Hong Kong sort of thing. So
yeah,
that's all I have to add to that.
Okay.
Repeated inoculation of skepticism.
Well, education, that's good. Hey, listen, I want to thank both of you for taking time today. If there's any questions I missed, I think I'd encourage people, and Billy, I'm going to put you on the spot, but call Bill at FoxNet. If you have a question we missed, I'm sure you or one of your gang can answer any thing that we missed, or if it comes in after we're finished up here. But thank you to both of you for taking the time. I'm really pleased with the partnership that's really bringing the eSentire global leading security aspect for the new internet or digital world to small business through partnerships like this with Bill and FoxNet and others, because really small businesses have got to make sure we're protected from these types of attacks, and it's a great partnership. So thank you to both of you for taking time today. To our attendees, you will receive a link of the webinar or following, along with the presentation. This will be loaded up onto our, I don't know where it is, website or YouTube or somewhere, but it'll be available along with the other webinars we've done over the last month, that you can access that if you want to watch it again or refer to your friends and colleagues. So thank you for taking time to join us today. We appreciate your time, both to you, Bill, and to Eldon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for having us.
And everyone have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Yeah. All right.